At 2:37 in the morning, the phone rang. The voice on the other end was shaking. Not with fear of being caught, but with something closer to regret. The caller was crying. And he wanted the police to know what he had done. The city was quiet when officers arrived at the scene. A residential street. Dim porch lights. Nothing that suggested violence at first glance. But inside, they found a young woman who had been attacked and left barely alive. She was rushed to the hospital, clinging to life. Doctors worked quickly, and against the odds, she survived long enough to speak. She described her attacker as a stranger, a man she had never seen before. Someone who appeared suddenly, without warning, and vanished just as quickly. At the time, there was nothing unusual about the case. A brutal assault. Another file added to a growing stack. But what no one knew yet was that this crime had already been reported, not by a witness, not by a neighbor, but by the attacker himself. Weeks earlier, police dispatchers had received an unsettling call. The man on the line sounded young. His voice cracked as he spoke. He told them he had hurt someone. That he didn't know why he did it. That he felt terrible. He cried openly. Apologized. Then hung up. The call was traced to a public phone. By the time officers arrived, the booth was empty. At first, investigators believed it was a prank. Or someone struggling with mental illness. There was no crime scene attached to the call. No victim. Nothing to connect it to. So the recording was filed away. Months passed. Then it happened again. Another late-night call. Same trembling voice. Same tone of remorse. This time, the caller mentioned details that hadn't been released to the public. A location. A method. A timeline that only the attacker could know. The call ended the same way. A soft sob. A click. Police realized something was wrong. This wasn't a prank. This was a pattern. In the early 1980s, the city was already on edge. Violent crime was rising. Resources were stretched thin. And now, someone was calling police to confess, without giving him a chance to stop him. Detectives reviewed the tapes again and again. The voice was distinctive. High-pitched. Unsteady. Almost childlike. Some officers described it as unnerving. Others said it sounded rehearsed, as if the caller wanted to be remembered. The media eventually got hold of the recordings. And that's when the nickname appeared. The weepy-voiced killer. As the attacks continued, so did the calls. Each time, the same routine. An apology. A confession. Tears. But the crimes themselves told a different story. Witnesses described someone calm. Focused. Methodical. There was a contradiction forming. How could someone so emotional on the phone be so controlled during the attacks? Investigators began to suspect the remorse wasn't real. It was part of the experience. Police attempted to bait the caller. They released statements through the media. Asked him to turn himself in. Told him help was available. The calls kept coming. In one recording, the voice trembled as he said he was sorry. In another, he sounded frustrated, almost angry, that police hadn't caught him yet. That shift in tone raised alarms. This wasn't guilt. It was ego. The break didn't come from the phone calls. It came from a survivor. A woman who had been attacked months earlier contacted police again. She told them she had seen her attacker recently, at a bus stop. He looked ordinary. Unremarkable. The kind of person you wouldn't notice twice. But she remembered his face. Officers began surveillance. They followed the man quietly. Learned his routines. Waited. And eventually, they arrested him. His name was Paul Michael Stefani. At first, he denied everything. Then police played the recordings. The reaction was immediate. His posture changed. His breathing slowed. And for the first time, the crying stopped. He didn't ask how they found him. He didn't ask about the evidence. He asked one question. Did people hear the calls? During interrogation, the contradictions became clearer. Stefani admitted to making the phone calls. He admitted to the attacks. But when asked why he called police, his answers shifted. Sometimes he said he felt guilty. Other times, he said he wanted help. Then, finally, he admitted something else. He liked being heard. The calls made him feel important. Powerful. In control, even after the crime was over. The remorse wasn't for the victims. It was for himself. Psychologists later analyzed the recordings. They noted how the crying never fully interfered with speech. How key details were delivered clearly. How the emotional breaks seemed timed. It wasn't a breakdown. It was a performance. In court, the tapes were played again. This time, in silence-filled rooms. With families listening. With survivors watching. The same voice that once sounded pitiful now felt calculated. Manipulative. The jury didn't take long. Stefani was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. The calls stopped. The city exhaled. But the story didn't end there. Years later, journalists revisited the case. They replayed the tapes. Studied the transcripts. And a question lingered. What if the calls had been taken seriously from the beginning? What if the first apology hadn't been dismissed? Could later attacks have been prevented? Even now, decades later, the recordings still circulate. Not for what they confess, but for how they sound. A crying voice. A shaking breath. A man pretending to feel something he didn't. And it raises an unsettling thought. If remorse can be faked so convincingly, how many other voices have we believed, simply because they sounded sincere? And when the phone rings in the middle of the night, how do you know who's really on the other end?